Good evening, everyone. It's good to see you guys this evening. It's good to be here at the Centerville Road Church of Christ, where we do know how to worship Thee in spirit and in truth. Our text tonight is taken from Mark chapter 8, verses 36 through 37. Mark chapter 8, verses 36 through 37. For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Today, many people do not think about their having a soul. Some thinks only of their body, yes, that hunk of dirt with clothing on. Most think on how they can please their bodies, but they do not think about how they can please the one who created their bodies. Some live as though they do not have a soul. Some believe they can live like they want to, lie, cheat, steal, kill, and many ungodly things. I'm not trying to sound condescending because I am far from being perfect. But if they were to read their Bibles where Paul say in 2 Corinthians 5, the verses 10, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that everyone, not some, may receive the things done in his body, yes, our bodies, according to that he has done, whether it be good or bad. Reality check. We are more than this physical body. My topic, we are triune beings, 3 in 1. Soul, spirit, and body. Paul tells us in 1 Thessalonians 5, the verses 23, and the very God of peace sanctify you wholly, and I pray God, your whole spirit and soul and body be preserved blameless until the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. Our physical bodies are the vehicle which we take our earthly journey, and our earthly journey only. You see, men do not need the Bible to tell them that they will die. But men need the Bible to tell them where they are going after they die. Our body has its 5 senses used to communicate in this physical world. The body is the mortal part of us whose future is the dust. Genesis 3, the verses 19d, for dust thou art, and dust thou shalt return. Our souls, which is the seat of our different affections and passions, such as love, hatred, anger, desire, will, with its sensations and appetites. Our soul is different. It cannot be harmed physically. Jesus said in Matthew 10, the verses 28, and fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Our spirit is that immortal part of us, the source of life of the body. James 2, the verses 26a. For as the body without the spirit is dead, it possesses all faculties, intelligence, understanding. It is the seat of reasoning, thinking, consciousness, responsibility. It is that distinguishes us from animals. It connects us with the highest intelligence, the self-existent one, the God of the universe, the great I am. We are living beings created by our Maker, Genesis 2, the verses 7. And the Lord God formed man out of the dust of the earth and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Most translation use this term, living being. God breathed into man's nostrils and he became a living being, or a soul of life. With individuality, we are not robots that move with every whim of its maker. Adam and all later human beings became a unique mixture of physical and spiritual beings as we are today. Nothing else in God's creation received the breath of life. Hebrew scholars tells us that the word life is plural in its original language. I believe that it is perhaps speaking of both the physical and the spiritual life. Why? In order to communicate with God or our Maker, we must have a spirit. John 4, the verses 24. God is what? Spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in what? Spirit and truth. It goes on without saying, animals cannot worship God. I'd like to close with the 5 different births. Our first birth, there is a soil birth. It was when Adam was formed from the dust of the ground, Genesis 2, the verses 7. The second is the surgical birth, was when God made Adam and Eve, when God made Eve from the rib of Adam, Genesis 2, the verses 21 and 22. Third is the sac birth. It is when the baby is born after the mother's water sac burst. Fourth is our Savior's birth, when Christ was born of Mary, which is called the virgin birth. The fifth birth is the spiritual birth, John 3, the verses 5, which is the new birth, which comes when one obeys the gospel of the Son of God and submit to water baptism, as you may do tonight. You've heard the word, believe the same, repent, confess, and be baptized. Why don't you come as we stand and sing the Savior's invitation? Why don't you come?
And that thou didst We have no other announcements, but we dismiss to our classes.
It's good to be back with you this Wednesday night. I appreciate last Wednesday, Brother Tyler bringing class in here. But we're back to what we've been looking at on our Wednesday night series, Running with Horses, Learning to Deal with Life's Problems. And of course, what we've been dealing with for the previous 3 weeks, we're looking at grief. And of course, we intend to look at this again tonight and probably conclude next Wednesday night, Lord willing. So really, when you think about this has been a 5-part series, a lengthy series in one regard, but yet sometimes lessons are so timely that they are needed and even to be expanded upon. And so, 5-part series, the research that I've done, I think is helpful for each and every one of us. And specifically, we want to keep this biblical because ultimately, it is going to be our God who is going to help us through the process of grief. And so I really think, and we've mentioned this before, that grief is one of the most substantial problems that we'll ever have to face in this life, one of the biggest problems that we'll ever have to deal with. And so when we talk about running with horses, yes, dealing with life's problems, here's one of the biggest. Now, when we conclude the look at grief, I'm talking personally. We all have to deal with grief, and in that regard, it's one of the biggest problems that we face. When we conclude our study on grief, we're going to be moving into something. It will be something that I don't think it's as big as a problem personally, but collectively as a people, it's as big or bigger than grief. It's something all of us must get a grip on. And so I'm not going to tell you what that is right now. I want you to be pondering what could that be. But here's what we've looked at already. We've dealt with the definition. We're not going to put it up here, but remember this. Now, the Latin word for grief is gravis, and it means heavy. To me, that tells us everything we need to know about grief. We're talking about something that weighs heavy upon our heart. And again, one of the other definitions was pain of mind. And remember, it's caused by any kind of sorrow, any kind of problem. And so that leads us to the causes. We've mentioned anything can cause us grief. And we've cited those things in previous lessons. We gave examples of grief throughout the Bible. We looked at Bible verses regarding grief. We had quotes concerning grief. We noticed the 5 stages of grief. And remember, this is not something we can rush ourselves through. It's not something we can rush anyone else through. Again, the 5 stages: denial, and then anger turned outward, and then anger turned inward, And then genuine grief. When we've stopped denying what has happened, we're no longer angry at others or self, and we just grieve. And then the fifth stage, resolution. This is when we get back to life. We also mentioned the 3 seasons of grief. And that first season is acute pain. This pain is intense. But it moves to the second season, which is dull pain. Oh, the pain is still there, but we're beginning to get back some feeling. And then the last season of grief is healing. And of course, the healing from the 3 seasons, it is tantamount to the resolution for the 5 stages. This is when we get back to life. And then we gave some more quotes. Well, tonight, here's what we're going to do. This is where we left off. We're going to talk about grief care, things to remember, and then also how to help a heavy heart. And again, we will, as I mentioned, probably be concluding this next Wednesday night. So what I really want you to think about when we get to how to help a heavy heart, I've mentioned the 2 that have given me some input into this, Sister Irene and also Sister Patty. I'm going to put their names up in light tonight, whether we get to it tonight or later. But I want you to be thinking about, next week, if you're thinking from tonight to next week and you have something that you want to share, how we can help someone with a heavy heart. How can we help them bear that burden? How can we help lessen the load? Then please write it down, and we'll again put it within the study, because we need to learn again how we can be helped, and of course how to help others. But grief care, things to remember. Now, notice this is where we left off a couple of weeks ago. Grief is not about easy answers or solutions. Now, grief itself is not easy. If there's one thing we've tried to emphasize is that grief is difficult. Grief is challenging for each and every one of us. So, since grief itself is not easy, then grief, obviously, it's not about easy answers. It's not about easy solutions. It is about answers, and it is about solutions, but those answers are going to be hard. And those solutions, they will take a while. And so grief, let's remember this, it's not about easy answers or solutions. Not when you're dealing with grief yourself, or not when you're trying to help someone deal with their grief. It does have answers, it does have solutions, but no, not easy. And notice this next one. Grief is a complex mixture of very strong emotions. I don't think you can find as many strong emotions in anything else other than grief. Because think about what we've talked about. Grief involves denial, it involves some disbelief, it involves anger, it involves shock at times, it involves bitterness, it involves resentment. There are so many things that come together within grief. And then as we work through those strong emotions, they will end up finally in joy, in peace, in forgiveness. Again, strong emotions. But grief is a complex mixture of very strong emotions. And I think this goes back to what we've said earlier. That's why the answers are not easy. And that's why the solutions are not easy. We're dealing with some complex issues. Notice also, many things contribute to the ability to work through grief. Now, I would just suggest a few, and if you have anything to add afterwards, please do that. But I want you to think about this, maybe as we think about what contributes to my ability, to your ability to work through grief. Well, it might be previous grief. Have we dealt with grief before? That should help us. Depth of loss. That is going to, again, determine our ability on how long it takes us to work through grief. Greater loss, obviously, is going to bring greater grief. Our support system. I think our spiritual maturity. I think our emotional well-being. There's just a lot. Again, it goes back to what we've just said, this complex mixture. And so, again, many things contribute to the ability to work through grief. And this is why we have to be patient with self. This is why we have to be patient with one another. And do not ever think when you're dealing with grief that there's something wrong with you because you haven't, quote unquote, gotten over it. It's been a week or 2 weeks or a month or 2 months and I'm still not completely over it. Well, that's to be expected. Again, think with me about this. Those grieving have various and legitimate needs. We mentioned in one of those seasons of grief, remember, we need comforters. And I would say those grieving have various and legitimate needs. They need others. But obviously, you cannot force yourself upon someone that's grieving. I think maybe we're tempted at times to do that because we've been there, we know what has helped us, we want to help, we're very sincere about that, and yet if we're not careful, we end up forcing ourselves upon them. They do need others, but once again, let them be the one at times to be, telling you what they need. And again, I'm not saying stand aloof. I'm not saying, don't be there for them. But once again, those are some of the needs. They need understanding, don't they? They need patience. A lot of things are needed when someone is grieving. And think about this now. We're not trying to be exhaustive in any of these, but those who seek to comfort the grieving must be equipped for this noble work. Now, when I say that, I'm not talking about we have to have courses and at the end of the course we will get some diploma that says, now, Kim, you are ready. No, I think what we're talking about here, two things in my estimation, and everything else is going to flow into those two things. First, spiritual wisdom, spiritual counsel, again, from God's Word. And secondly, common sense. Those two things, and all of us can do that. Again, when we talk about we've got to be equipped, we're not saying, well, some can be equipped and others cannot be equipped. No, every one of us can be equipped. You remember in 2 Timothy, the 3rd chapter, in verse 16, all Scripture is given by inspiration of God, that the man of God might be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto every good work. And again, that's what we're talking about, that kind of equipment there. Again, Scripture and common sense. Now, notice this also. When grieving, be very careful not to listen exclusively to your feelings and emotions. When grieving, I think this is so important. When grieving, be very careful not to listen exclusively to your feelings and emotions. I'm not saying you don't need to listen to your feelings. And I'm not saying you don't need to listen to your emotions. I'm saying don't do that only. Don't do that exclusively. I have mentioned this several times, but this was like a light bulb went off in my head years ago when I came to the understanding that feelings tell us one thing. Because feelings can be so complex, as we've already mentioned. Feelings can take us off in this direction, that direction. But when we understand that my feelings only tell me how I feel, then that helps me to understand that I don't need to exclusively listen to them. They're only telling me how I feel. They are not educating me on the premise that, Ken, those feelings are right too. Those feelings are legitimate. Those feelings are appropriate. You know, sometimes in grief we ask why. We want to know why. We think that God has dealt unfairly with us. We want to know how long is all of this going to take? And I would suggest this, leave the difficult questions like those for a later time in the grieving process. They're important questions, but once again, what happens, our feelings, we begin to think that God doesn't hear me anymore. God doesn't care about me. God has broken a promise to me. I'll never leave you nor forsake you. Really, Lord? Then where are you? And so we cannot listen exclusively to our feelings. You remember what Jesus said in Luke 9 and verse 44? Let these words sink down into your ears. You know, when Jesus taught, he was aiming at the heart, but he knew to get to the heart, he had to go through the ears. Let these words sink down into your ears. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of the Lord. Romans 10 and verse 17. Take heed how you hear. Luke 8 and verse 18. Simon, I have somewhat to say to you. And Simon said, say on, Lord. Luke 7 and verse 40. And so we listen. Yes, we listen. 1 Samuel 3, verses 9 and 10. Speak, Lord, thy servant is listening. We listen, but not exclusively to our feelings or our emotions. They can mislead us. Turn with me to a Bible verse. In John 16, now a lot of times when we talk about our emotions, our feelings, a lot of times we'll talk about Acts 23 and verse 1. Paul, I've lived in all good conscience unto God until this day. And it talks about, Paul thought he was right and he was wrong. His feelings were misdirected, misguided. In Acts 26 and verse 9, Paul said, I thought I had to do many things hostile to the name of Jesus of Nazareth. So even though he felt like that, it wasn't right. It wasn't correct. But we don't hear this one often. Look at John 16. Look at John 16 and read with me, if you will, verses 1 and 2. Here's one of the best verses about conscience, if you will, or about feelings and emotions, how they can be wrong. Look what it says here, John 16 and verse 1. These things I have spoken to you, that you should not be made to stumble. Now listen to this. Verse 2. They will put you out of the synagogues. Yes, the time is coming that whosoever kills you will think that he offers God service. You can't be more wrong than that. But the people felt like, Jesus said the time's coming. They'll kill you and they'll feel like they're offering service to God. They'll feel like their emotions are telling them, this is what God would have me to do. What did Saul do? He was ravaging the church. He was entering house after house. You remember in Acts the 8th chapter and verse 3? And in chapter 9, verses 1 and following, he's still breathing out murders and threats. Well, he did that in all good conscience. He did that because that's what he felt like he should do. And so be careful, grief. It is a powerful emotion. You're dealing with complex issues and other complex emotions. And so be very careful not to listen exclusively to your feelings and emotions. You need to listen to them, but not exclusively. Turn with me to another passage. This one is quite interesting to me. In Genesis 42, look what happens in Genesis 42. In Genesis 42, we're going to read verse 36. And this is what Jacob says after his sons have come back. And remember, Simeon has been left in Egypt. Benjamin, they want to take Benjamin because the man that they stood before, which was their brother Joseph, which they didn't know, they didn't recognize, wanted them to bring their younger brother. So when they go home without Simeon, and when they tell their father Jacob that, well, only way we're going to get anything is to bring Benjamin, look how he felt. Now, I'm emphasizing this. Look how he felt. We're going to hear just how Jacob felt, but it's all wrong. All of the feelings that he had were wrong. They were misinterpreted. They were miscalculated. And so look what it says here. Genesis 42 and verse 36, and Jacob, their father, said to them, you have bereaved me. Now notice, what is a bereaving heart? It's a grieving heart, isn't it? You have bereaved me. I am in grief right now. And here's why. Joseph is no more. Remember when they came back with Joseph's coat and said, Father, isn't this his coat? And they smeared blood, animal blood on it, and they left Jacob to come to the conclusion that Joseph's dead. He's been put to death by an animal probably. And so he says, I'm bereaved. Why, Jacob? Well, here's good reason. Joseph is no more. And notice what he goes on to say. Simeon is no more. You came back without him. And then notice what he goes on to say, and you want to take Benjamin. Now look at this last observation. All these things are against me. All of these things, he said, are against me. No, Jacob, guess what? You're about to find out that all of these things, God has worked them together for good. Because Joseph is. Joseph is alive. Simeon's going to be okay. And when you take Benjamin, Joseph's going to reveal himself. Joseph's going to want to provide for you and his brothers. All these things are against me? No. God is using all these things for my good. And so here's one of the best reasons I can state this biblically. When grieving, be very careful not to listen exclusively to your feelings and emotions. If Jacob would have done that, he would have said, I will not send my youngest son. Benjamin cannot go with you. And who knows? Who knows the end result now of the story? But isn't that interesting? Our feelings and our emotions are God-given. Our feelings and our emotions, they're very important. But no, I don't want to, in the state of bereavement with a heavy heart, listen exclusively to them. I need to at all times listen to my God. Again, speak, Lord, thy servant is listening. And so notice also this. Never try to rush someone through the grieving process. There is a sense in which you cannot do anything with grief except to endure it. And what I'm saying at the end of this, I'm not saying you can't do anything with grief, but I'm saying you can't do anything until you do deal with it. You can't do anything until you do pass through it. You can't do anything until you deal with those layers, if you will, of grief, the denial, the anger turned outward, the anger turned inward, the genuine grief, and the resolution. No, you can't just sweep it under the rug. You can't try to avoid it. You can't evade it. You can't deny it. And so, again, never try to rush someone, that's yourself included. Never try to rush someone through the grieving process. There is a sense in which you cannot do anything with grief except to endure it. Let me read a quote at this time. Samuel Johnson made this observation: when grief is fresh. Now think about this. Something has just happened. That grief is fresh. When grief is fresh, any attempt to divert it only irritates. We have to pass through. We have to go through the grief. And so, again, what we do with the pain is we persevere in the midst of it. And what we do with this grief is we learn how to endure. We count those blessed who endure. James 5 and verse 11. And of course that's talking about Job, and more importantly, James 5 and verse 11 is talking about God. You've seen the end of the Lord's dealings, how He is full of mercy and is compassionate. Now, let's do this. How to help a heavy heart. Remember what we're talking about here. We're talking about gravis. We're talking about heavy. How can we help that individual with the heavy heart? You remember what Jesus said in John 14 and verse 1? Let not your heart be troubled. Well, wouldn't you agree that that heavy heart is a troubled heart? Yeah. How can we help someone go from a heavy heart, a troubled heart, to a merry heart? Now let me tell you something. Those are poles apart, are they not? They're at the opposite ends of the spectrum. Here's that heavy heart. Grief is fresh. But we're trying to get individually and collectively back over here to this merry heart. Turn with me to the book of Proverbs. Proverbs 17. Look what we find here. In Proverbs 17, let me get there. Proverbs 17, look if you will at verse 22. Proverbs 17 and verse 22. A merry heart does good like medicine, but a broken spirit dries the bone. I think in that one verse you see what we're talking about. The heavy heart, that's the broken spirit. And it is just depleting us of everything, emotionally, spiritually. And so, again, that broken spirit, that troubled heart. But again, it begins, the merry heart does good like medicine. And so we want to go from that troubled heart back to that merry heart. Doesn't mean we're ever going to be happy about what's happened, especially as we've been talking mainly about the loss of a loved one. No, we're never going to be happy about that. If they're a faithful child of God, we can rejoice. But we would still love to have them here if it was God's will. And look at another passage, if you will, in Proverbs 15, I think it is. Proverbs 15, look at verse 13. Here's that heart again, that merry heart. And look what it says. A merry heart makes a cheerful countenance, but by sorrow of the heart, the spirit is broken. And so here's that grieving heart with the merry heart in the same verse. How do we go from A to Z? How can we help someone? Sometimes we're left with the question, can we? Can we? Is there anything possible that we can do to help? Now remember, there are answers, but they're not easy. There are solutions, but they're not easy. Grief is difficult, it's not easy, and the answers, the solutions are not going to be either. Now, here's Sister Irene. Here's what she said. I want you to notice, one of these is going to be positive, one of these is going to be negative. And then when we notice Sister Patty, what she said, it's going to be one statement, it's going to be negative. There are the do's and don'ts, if you will. in trying to help people go through the grieving process. There are some things you want to do. There are some things you say, I don't do that. Don't say that. Now, I think both of these ladies will agree. It's hard to make a statement and say that this is true 100% of the time. I think everything these ladies have said, it's true. And generally speaking, it's very true. But even in these observations, there are times there may be an exception to what was said. And the key is maybe. Maybe. I'm not saying I'm wise enough to know when the exception is. Remember James 1 and verse 5, we pray for wisdom, don't we? Why? Because we don't have it. We need it. And so certainly in the grieving process, when we're trying to help someone with that heavy heart, that broken spirit, that troubled heart, we need wisdom in this. Well, here's what Sister Irene says first. Listen intently to the feelings of the one who is suffering from grief. I think the key here is listen. Listen. And how do I listen to someone who's grieving? Listen intently. That's what you're there for. You're not there to give them a soliloquy. You're not there to just go off and tell them all of your wisdom. You're there to listen. And you're there to listen intently. And you know what you're going to hear about? You're going to hear about their feelings. Now, we've already addressed for us individually, let's not us, while we're grieving, listen exclusively to our feelings because they might be wrong. But when I'm there trying to help someone, listen. Listen intently to the feelings of the one who is suffering from grief. You know, we'll talk about this later on, but, you know, on Sunday morning we're looking at Job, and it's funny how these two studies dovetail, Job and this subject of grief, because Job's friends, this is what they didn't do. They didn't listen really at all. Job, when they came to Job, and we'll see this, but when they came, they were silent for 7 days and 7 nights. And it almost seems like that Job thought, since these men have been so kind and they've been so patient, they have sat here silently with me. Now it seems like Job is thinking in chapter 3, now I feel free to express my feelings to them. Well, Job, you can do it, but watch out. Because as soon as Job feels like he can express his feelings to them, they're all over him. I mean, all over him like a rabid wolf. And so we listen intently to the feelings of the one who is suffering from grief. This is what the friends should have continued to do. And then, again, here's the negative. Do not tell the person how they should feel or make suggestions of what to do. Now again, there may be times, as I've said, there may be exceptions. You may know this person so well that you know they need to do this and they know they need to do it. But even then, it's not one of these things, if I were you, here's what I would do, or you need to do this. It's still even then on the basis of, you know what we can do together? You know what we can do? Or let us do this. But even then, we're very careful, aren't we? And so do not tell the person how they should feel or make suggestions of what to do. So many times, if I were in your place, guess what? You're not. And you never will be. Even when you are suffering from the same grief. And what I mean is maybe it's the loss of a husband. Still, everything is not 100% equal. And so here's what Patty tells us. And both of these ladies have had experience helping others with grief. They know what they're talking about. Patty says, do not tell them I know how you feel. You really don't. Even when we can justify it by saying, no, I do, because I've lost a child too, or I've done the same thing. No. Again, remember what we've said about what comes into play about our ability to work through grief? There's a lot of different factors. And my life doesn't always have the same factors in them that this person's life does. They may be very spiritually strong, and I'm going to them in a weakened state, maybe still grieving myself, saying, I know how you feel. And then I pour out my heart to them, and I can hurt them because they may be farther along in the grieving process. Something may have happened to me a year ago, and something may have just happened to them. And they may be farther along than I am. And so let's be careful. Let's understand, don't tell them I know how you feel. Now, having said that, here's what I want us to do. We're just going to, we have like 14 points here, okay? And they're going to be sort of those sentence statements, okay? Sentence sermons. We're just going to make some very quick observations and short statements regarding how to help a heavy heart. And the first thing, let's remember, presence is precious. Presence is precious. Your presence in their life, your presence by way of a call, by way of a card, by way of a visit, whatever it is, presence is precious. Now, let me give you a couple of quotes that we've looked at thus far. And you might even think, Ken, wait a minute now. You said in some quotes something different. I don't think this is different. I think we need to mention this, but we mentioned in our first lesson concerning some quotes that grief is a walk alone. Well, I don't think there's any difference between what we've said in that quote and this right here. Grief is a walk alone. It is something I have to do by myself. But it doesn't mean that others cannot help. You remember we talked about one time Galatians 6 and verse 2, bear ye one another's burdens and thus fulfill the law of Christ. Well, 3 verses later in Galatians 6 and verse 5, each man will bear his own load or his own burden. So there are burdens that I can help you bear. There are burdens that you can help me bear. And there are those burdens that no one can help us. It's something we bear our own load. Well, that's what we're talking about here. Grief is something that every individual is going to have to deal with. It can be viewed as a walk alone, but that doesn't mean that we're not there with them and there for them. Presence is precious. Let me read a quote. And I'm not even sure, someone probably knows much better than me, but this, I copied this down so many years ago that this is from Clark Covington. And back then, what I jotted down concerning who this man is and his credentials, he was, quote, the manager of the space station project at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston. I don't even know if it's still called that, okay? I don't know if it's still called that, but what he says is right. And again, here's what he says. Now, he's got that background, okay? The space age and technology. But here's what he says. He says, with all the vast technology of our space age, there is still nothing more powerful than one human being reaching out to another. I think we'll all agree with that, wouldn't we? Nothing more powerful than that. You remember Psalm 142 and verse 4, no man cares for my soul. That's how David felt. It wasn't true. He still had faithful, loyal friends. But he felt that no man cared for his soul. In Lamentations 1 and verse 12, again, to personify loneliness, the city of Jerusalem is depicted as a widow. And so that people just would not walk by. Again, the widow is grabbing them, if you will, in verse 12 of chapter 1 and asking the question, is it nothing to all you who pass this way? Well, it should be something to us. Isn't it sad when people go through the grieving process with no one who seemingly cares, no one who reaches out to them? Is it nothing to all you who pass this way? Is it true that no man cares for my soul? Turn with me, if you will, to Job, the 2nd chapter. I know we'll get caught right here. That's okay. In Job, the 2nd chapter, remember what we're talking about. Presence is precious. These men, say what you may about them, they had good intentions. They had initially kind hearts. Job's grief sent them reeling. Well, I told you we'd get caught here. Now, what we'll do is we'll begin next Wednesday night, Lord willing, by reading Job 2, verses 11 through 13. And what you're going to see, several things, but you're going to see that they came by appointment. Job meant so much to him. These three men got together and said, let's all go. Let's mourn with him. Let's comfort him. Presence is precious. Thank you tonight for being here. Thank you for listening so intently. Now, again, if you have something that'll help, please write it down, give it to me, how to help a heavy